Hey, what is up guys? Hope you're all having an amazing day. And today we are talking about the 6800 XT. More specifically, I want to share my thoughts on it because I think there's some really interesting things I want to talk about that maybe reviewers touch a little bit on but haven't touched enough on, or more along the lines of reasons why I think it's important to talk about the performance advantage the 6800 XT has, as well as the disadvantage it has compared to the 3080 and 3090. So I don't have the card. Let me start off by saying that, right? I don't have the card. I don't have a Micro Center even in my state, nor any other store that would even be remotely likely to have it in store. And obviously even the ones that did was like two. I mean, there's reports of like Micro Centers only having like two XTs, and yeah, stock levels don't seem to be any better than Nvidia's. So even if I was able to order the card today, I wouldn't even have it in my hands yet. It would take a few days at least to get here. I am looking, actually, though. One of the biggest reasons why I didn't try too hard to order the 6800 XT is because I'm really looking forward to trying to get my hands on the 6900 XT. Unfortunately, it's one of those days, or rather one of those times, where we can't afford to wait for reviewer benchmarks to come out. We just have to, if you want to pick up these cards, you have to be clicking F5, trying to refresh it, refresh the page the day of purchase, like the day of release, and you have to still be incredibly lucky to even get the cards. I cannot talk. I'm like messing up my words here, so I apologize for that. So anyways, don't have the cards, but obviously I've looked up a bunch of reviewer benchmarks on it because I'm very interested in this card, and I'm very interested in how it competes with Nvidia. So obviously I looked into all this, took into account all the benchmarks that came out, and really kind of came up with a lot of interesting points I want to talk about, because I don't think either reviewers haven't been talking enough about it, or just not really even mentioning it at all, depending on who you're watching. First thing I want to mention is that the benchmarks I want to focus on are going to be the ones from Tech Yes City, because he benchmarked a ton of games at 1080p, 1440p, and also 4K. So he did a lot of games, and that's really important when it comes to looking at these cards, because depending on the game, the performance varies a lot, to the point where if you look at these benchmarks and you happen to have a lot of those games actually favoring Nvidia, you might look at the RDNA 2 cards and think that they're garbage because Nvidia is just trampling all over them, or at least not good value rather. Whereas if it's the opposite and you look at a lot of games that heavily favor RDNA 2, for instance, Borderlands 3 is super favorable to AMD graphics cards right now. And if you look at those benchmarks, then you're going to think the opposite. You're going to look at those and think that RDNA 2 is just trampling over Ampere. So it's really important to actually take into account the games that you're looking at and really notice that the performance difference between the two, when you take them all into account, is really close. But if you don't, if you like only see some, or excuse me, the majority of the benchmarks you see are going to be favorable to one side, you're going to have a drastic different opinion on the cards. So when we look at these benchmarks, what we see is that RDNA 2, it's really competitive when it comes to Ampere. The 6800 is pretty much beating out the 3070 consistently. And then the 6800 XT is just constantly trading blows, with the 3080 pretty much beating it out most of the time in 1080p and 1440, with Nvidia winning on the 4K. And more specifically, the 3080 winning at 4K, not necessarily the 3070. It's still beating out the 3070 for 4K. But it's important to mention too that a lot of people who may think that a higher VRAM 3080 will help solve this issue, and by solve this issue I mean improve the 3080's performance compared to the 6800 XT, that's not so much it's not so much going to be the case, rather. So higher, or adding more VRAM to the card, is not going to actually improve the performance. What it would do, if it would increase the performance if there was a game that was using up more than 10 gigs of VRAM. But just increasing the VRAM, especially when we're talking about the lower resolution games, or not games, but when we're talking about playing in lower resolution like 1080p and 1440p, where it's not even using probably even 8 gigs of VRAM, then you're not going to see really a performance difference at all. But if there is a game that uses more than 10 gigs of VRAM and it's struggling in that sense, then a higher VRAM count would definitely benefit the 3080, but just a VRAM increase really isn't going to change these results that much at all. If anything though, it's pretty much confirmed, or rumored at least, with a lot of truth behind the rumor, I want to say, because it seems like it's going to be true, that Nvidia gave up on increasing the VRAM on the 3080 and it's just going to come out with like a 3080 Ti or Super, which probably will have more VRAM, but more importantly will actually have a higher performing GPU. So that's important to mention, because there's no way right now that it looks like Nvidia is actually going to be sitting down and just taking the 4K crown for the most part. They're probably going to want to compete even better and hopefully crush the competition that AMD has brought this year, because that's just what Nvidia likes to do. And we'll see if they really can do that, because truth be told, AMD this year is more competitive than they have been in a very, very long time. So yeah, it's looking pretty good for AMD right now. Not that it looks bad for Nvidia, just that for the first time in a long while, I was going to say ever, but that's definitely not true. AMD's definitely competed in the high end before. It's just been a long time. And so for the first time in a long time, AMD's really taking it in the high end market. They're going to take a lot of that market share away from Nvidia if it wasn't for the fact that supply is so low. So more than likely right now, both companies are going to sell out of whatever cards they can. So pretty much whoever can get more of the stock levels, like who can ever get more cards out there, is probably going to take more of the market share, because at this point pretty much everybody's just trying to grab whatever they can. So we'll see how that goes, but AMD's very competitive this year, no question about it. So it's also very important to mention that one of the reasons why Nvidia's cards are better at 4K is most likely going to be the GDDR6 memory, or 6X, excuse me, rather than the GDDR6 found on the 6800 and 6800 XT, as well as the 6900 XT. Also, it's important to mention the 3070 does not have 6X, it just has regular 6, but the 3090 and 3080 definitely have the 6X. So that's going to be one of the reasons why those two cards are going to be better competing at the 4K resolution, but why AMD is really taking the crown in a lot of ways in the 1080p and 1440p resolution. Ray tracing is important right now, because that's one of the biggest features with these new cards, as well as something that Nvidia has been pushing for, well, years now, because the 20 series I believe came out in 2018, right? So ray tracing, without a doubt, the crown's going to Nvidia for now. Realistically, I don't think anybody really expected AMD to match ray tracing performance with Nvidia. This is their first go with it, whereas Nvidia has had, this is their second go, and they've had a few more years working on it. So realistically, I don't think we'll see AMD be competing as well in the ray tracing part until RDNA 3 comes out, because they'll probably, if they continue with the momentum they have built up right now, it seems like their best work really comes out with this second iteration and then just keeps getting better after that. So AMD, for sure, I would look forward to their ray tracing performance whenever RDNA 3 comes out. But for the most part right now, it's very impressive that they were even able to get the pretty great ray tracing performance they have out of the 6000 series cards, for it being their first interpretation of it. So this is the first time they've done it, and it's actually pretty impressive that they were able to do it as good as they have been able to do it. Obviously, also ray tracing support is going to be important, because in the future it's probably going to be favorable to AMD, because they're using, or they rather are the manufacturers of the CPUs and GPUs in the consoles. So PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series is obviously huge, right? They sold out as well. There's a ton of people looking to pick them up if they haven't been able to pick it up already. And with that, a lot of developers are going to look to support those platforms primarily. So when it comes to ray tracing support, it's probably going to be favorable to AMD realistically, because they're running DirectX ray tracing with ray accelerators, where Nvidia is running RTX ray tracing with Turing cores. So that's, you know, two different kind of implementations of ray tracing, even though the generalization of it being ray tracing is the same, but it's not necessarily also the same, because again, there's two different architectures to do it, as well as also the quality of ray tracing possibly being different on the two. So we'll kind of see how well that develops over the years, and most likely even within a year with the launch of RDNA 3, we'll see it much more fleshed out on the AMD side, and probably still being incredibly well supported on the Nvidia side. No question about it, in my opinion, because Nvidia is still just a huge manufacturer GPUs, right? They're the largest. So AMD's doesn't make as much as, or doesn't have as much market share as Nvidia. So that's obviously a very important factor in all this as well. And this kind of all brings me to my summarizing thoughts on this. One of the biggest reasons why I want to make this video, that's because I think it's important for anybody who's looking to buy either one of these cards and is not sure which way to go, because I'm kind of one of those persons myself. I already kind of mentioned that I'm looking forward to trying to pick up the 6900 XT, but I can't tell you how many times I almost bit the bullet and bought a 3090 at the much higher than MSRP cost. Not from the scalpers, but actually from just, what do you call them, system integrators, the ones who build the entire system, because that's pretty much the only way right now that you can confirm to buy one. Even if it's not necessarily ready to ship right away, at least you kind of confirm buying it. I refuse to buy from the scalpers. I won't. But either way, and the reason I kind of want to look at a 3090 instead of 3080, by the way, because I know somebody's going to make that comment. A little bit of game development. I've been trying to get into Unreal Engine, and by trying to, I mean I've been working on a little project for a long while now and getting more and more into it. So kind of want a card with more VRAM, to be honest with you. And unfortunately, Nvidia did not come out with one that I consider to be a good amount. One of my pet peeves about this Ampere launch is that obviously stock level suck, but also I don't know why their flagship card, the 3080, came out at 10 gigs. I know they're originally planning to do a 20 gig version as well, but that just pisses me off. That 20 gig should have been the first one. Otherwise, all you're doing is getting all the buyers out there who want the highest end card but not looking for a Titan class, because that's essentially what a 3090 is. Get buyer's remorse because they bought a 3080 with 10 gigs of VRAM, and then later on a 20 gig VRAM version comes out. That's one of the things I don't like about Nvidia. They don't seem to care so much about taking care of their customers right away. A lot of times they just come out with something that is better than the one that they already charged full price for, and just kind of screwing over those people. I mean, we saw that with the super launch on all the 20 series cards. But that's a little side tangent, right? Nvidia, without a doubt, has a lot going for them. But to summarize my thoughts, if you're looking for a 4K gaming or better 4K gaming experience and also better ray tracing experience, you're probably looking at Nvidia. But if you're looking for more frames at 1080p and 1440p and also better value, you're pretty much looking at AMD. And I also say that because even though some of these charts show that they're pretty close in performance on some of these games, including on 4K too, by the way. There's some games where 4K is very close. It's still a great 4K experience on the 6800 XT in my opinion. I'm just saying, if you're going to compare the two, 3080 pretty much takes the lead majority of the time. But one thing that's really important to mention with RDNA 2 is there's much more room to overclock there. Like a lot more room. We're already hearing about how a lot of these board partners are able to get it past 2500 megahertz or 2.5 gigahertz. So that's insane. And the performance difference on those is going to be huge. So when those cards come out, we're probably going to see a much larger gap between AMD and Nvidia, and favoring AMD in the titles that it works well for and in the resolution that it shines at. So that's without a question my opinion. RDNA 2 is a much better overclocking architecture than Nvidia. Part of that is to do with the 7 nanometer manufacturing versus the 8 nanometer on Nvidia, but also part of it has to do with just the architecture itself. I mean, we've been hearing for a long time now that RDNA 2 is just really good at overclocking. And then one other thing I want to mention, it's really important for a lot of people too, is that the feature set is pretty much better for Nvidia, right? The NVENC encoder is better than AMD's offering, and also they have a ton of features that just a lot of people like. RTX voice is very impressive, and it's only on the RTX cards, as well as like the broadcaster, all those broadcasting features where it cuts out your background, where it, again, pretty much RTX voice for broadcasting, and the auto framing, stuff like that. Like all those features they showed off pretty much, right? You've probably seen Nvidia's original announcement video where they showed all those off. All those features are really good features. And obviously everybody's going to mention about DLSS, right? Obviously AMD is coming out with their own Fidelity FX version, which we'll kind of see more about and how well that works in the future. It's not really out yet. But with that being said, DLSS is out now and it works really well. So in a lot of ways, it's already pretty beneficial for Nvidia's side, at least currently, until AMD can either come out with one and also show that it works very well. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is obviously 6900 XT is not out yet. It comes out December 8th, which is not too long from now, and when that card comes out, probably have even more to say about it, because the truth is the 6900 XT is the big knobby, right? It's the 6800 XT in a lot of games is actually already trading blows with 3090, but it gets beat out on majority of them, right? That's for sure. The 6900 XT will kind of see how well that card comes into play, and that's obviously the card I'm most excited about right now. It's one that I'm trying to pick up, but it's also the card that's going to show off the best of RDNA 2, and that is going to be really important when it comes to making our overall final thoughts on how great RDNA 2 actually is. And I know I said that was going to be my last point, but one more thing I actually want to mention is that keep in mind these are day one drivers on RDNA 2, and Nvidia's done, or excuse me, AMD has tried to do a lot to improve their reputation with drivers, but at this point I kind of just accepted the fact that AMD, and this is true for Nvidia too, but not quite as much, AMD's worst performance is on day one. When they get about a month or two in and they get the best drivers that they can out for those cards, that's when we really see the cards at the best of their performance. We've seen that with Radeon 7, we've seen that with RDNA 1 for sure, and it's nice that these cards seem to actually come out with no issues right this time. So it looks like the drivers on day one were actually good, but again, we usually see with AMD a lot more performance come out with a driver update. Not enough to really say that it's going to be game changing, but keep in mind there's probably going to be a few more frames out of these RDNA 2 cards whenever we get better drivers out. And I hate to kind of say that because it sounds like such a cop-out answer, but it's true, and it's true for both sides. More so on AMD, but still true on both sides. And it's not to say that, again, this is going to be a game changer. Nvidia, whatever titles they win at, is probably going to win still, even with a driver update. But it's just important to mention because a lot of people, I've seen both sides, right? I've seen sides where it's like RDNA 2 is incredible, and then I've seen sides where RDNA 2 is garbage, and then I've seen the middle ground for the most part. But especially to those people who think RDNA 2 is garbage because they only benchmark those favorable titles for Nvidia, truth is that when we see these drivers come out and see that gap close, it's going to be really important, especially for the people who've only seen those videos. So I think that's important to mention because, one, Ampere's been out for a month now. It has better drivers out already, not so much on AMD's side, and it's going to be not that big of a difference in performance, but a little bit more. We'll get a little bit more out of those cards. And then obviously, as I said before, when the board partners come out with their overclocked cards, or when you overclock these cards yourself, you're going to get a lot more performance out of them. RDNA 2 is a much better overclocking architecture, as well as just the cards being on 7 nanometer itself. So performance per watt on them is really good. So again, when we get these cards overclocked, it's going to be a lot better, and I do mean a lot better. Like, that's a significant amount of performance we're going to get out of those cards. Lastly, I'm just going to mention that I left out smart access memory in terms of a pro for AMD because Nvidia already announced that they're pretty much going to have it on their cards as well. So I don't think it's that important. It's important in the sense that on both Nvidia and AMD, you're going to get a lot more performance out of your card, like a lot as in it's still a significant amount out of your, well, entire system at that point. But I don't want to give it as a pro to AMD because, again, Nvidia will have it as well. You just got to give it a little bit of time. So anyways, guys, that wraps up my thoughts, and I know this video has kind of been a long one, almost 20 minutes now, and I never really intend for these to be that long, but I just talk and I can't seem to shut up. So if you made it this far, I really want to say thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I plan to make a lot more about computer components. I am a hardware enthusiast, and I really can't wait for the 6900 XT. Like, really can't wait. I've been trying to upgrade my processor, my graphics card, for a long time now. Like 6 months I've been ready for this, and I've just been waiting for the new cards, and the stock level sucks. So yeah, it's been a hard time for a lot of us, huh? But anyways, guys, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I will see you all later.